welcome everybody to everyone who is at home and joining us online today. This is a wonderful opportunity. I'm very, very excited to be connecting with Tanwa and with Rafiu to talk about really what is going on in this moment. But I think to start off with, what I wanted to do was just sort of introduce the foundation a little bit and essentially tell you about some of the work that the Ogunbanjo Foundation has been doing and why this is so timely. When you think about, the foundation over the past 25 years, it's existed as a family foundation, and behind their mission is really around conflict resolution and peace building, right? That is one of the two sort of core tenets of the foundation, and they've done an immense amount of work in terms of supporting individuals during the COVID crisis. And now it seems that just out of one crisis, we're into another, which I think has some opportunities as well with the NSAS protest. To say without further ado, welcome and thank you for joining the foundation. My name is Vivian. I am a policy specialist and international development expert. I've done quite a lot of work in public policy across the African continent, advising different governments on policy and strategy as well. And I am very, very passionate about the country that I am from. The countries that I'm from, I'm actually half Namibian, half Nigerian. And from my Nigerian side speaks, very proudly today as we see, for the first time in a long time, young people mobilizing and saying enough is enough. And so really to speak with us today, we have two exceptional people. So the first is Tanwa. Now, Tanwa really has several years of experience in intelligence analysis, working with the US Department of Defense. And she's done her time. She served in Afghanistan. She served across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. And she holds a master's in intelligence studies. So Tanwa's background really is a phenomenal one in terms of her real expertise with governance, but from a security lens, which I think is something we really need to invoke. For a number of you who may have received your notification that as of 4 o'clock today, we are essentially in a 24-hour lockdown to ensure the security and safety of individuals. The Lagos state government has mandated this. So as we're in this moment, I think there's no timely, no better time to hear from somebody who really has the expertise and the background in both the US and the Nigeria and in Nigeria that Tanwa has. So welcome. Thank you for being with us, Tanwa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. And the second contributor that we have is Rafiu. Now, Rafiu, as really, it's always a pleasure to do research on the individuals that you're about to speak with and just get so refreshed and in awe again of the amount of work that they've done really in the grassroots. So for those of you who know Nigerian Youth for Peace Initiative, I mean, Rafiu is the man behind that and is a convener of this movement that really advocates and promotes peace in Nigeria. From an organizing perspective, which is sometimes something that we think, we really lack in West Africa, at least when we compare it to our Southern African brothers and sisters, the infrastructure for mobilization, for youth organizing and civic engagement is really lacking. And so Rafiu is really one of those individuals who is doing that. He's the founder and executive director of Building Blocks for Peace Foundation. That's really building the resilience of people against violent philosophies and promoting sustainable peace in Nigeria. So it's a real pleasure to have you as well. Welcome, Rafiu. And maybe let's start the conversation then with you, Tanwa. And really, I think the first question everybody wants to know is, what is this protest? And not just in the sense of, okay, we know that young people are out on the streets, but really, what's the birthplace of this protest, and what do you think is at the heart of what's happening right now in Nigeria?
I think overall, the young people are really just protesting pent-up frustration of just bad governance. I think it's just that frustration of neglect. frustration of them just persistently being turned down and not having even a voice or a chance to be a part of the discussions, a part of the elections, a part of governance in this country. So I believe that's really the main thing that we're seeing here. I know it started off with the NSARS, and I think NSARS was just enough to just spur, to spur people moving, the mobilization, to spur the emotions towards this. But at the end of the day, immediately when the government saw that the young people were very serious, they meant business, they were not going to move from where they were, they immediately disbanded SARS, which, by the way, just about, I think a few months ago, when one of the major attacks happened and it was on the news and people were calling for the ban, the PRO, the forced PRO at the time said, oh, it was impossible to ban SARS. People should just try to safely record any kind of misconduct by their men and that the police will investigate it. And what we then saw was a complete, absolute turnaround because, just the pressure was on. So young people had enough. They primarily were the target of these SARS operatives. And what we're really seeing is more young people started getting more involved in being able to earn more money online. It's just the direction that the world is going in. So you have young people who sign up for different online tasks that they can do, and where they're building websites, they're software engineers, so they're doing a lot of that. They're content curators, so if you're making money on YouTube, for example, producing videos, and because of that you're now able to afford a nice car, you're able to look nice, and of course you have nice phones. It's part of the work that you're doing in terms of producing content. And then all of a sudden a policeman then stops you and says, well, you're definitely involved in cybercrime, because how else should you have this nice car and nice phone? And they demand almost about $1,300, the equivalent of that, which is about $500,000 in some cases, just for you to that you have to pay them before they let you go. And then unfortunately, some of those encounters ended in fatalities as well. It was just one too many. And the young people had said, look, you know what, enough is enough. They're not listening to us. And I think the hashtag NSARS really started in 2017, because and not to say that the abuses didn't start until then. They started until then. I think this is when things became public on social media and people started voicing their opinions about it in 2017. It grew so that by 2018 August, the vice president at the time then released a statement and said, okay, no problem, there will be an overhaul of the SARS unit. Again, just like we've seen time and time again, they speak, but then no actions to follow. And it's a Nigerian problem. Just, there are a lot of plans, there are a lot of action points, but there's zero implementation. And so there was no implementation on that. And then fast forward 2 more years, we're back to the same story, except now the young people put even more intensity on the situation. So, we're glad that at least young people have spoken up. They found their voices. They're now aware of the power that they wield in making sure that the elected officials hear their voices. But then with this has come a completely different side and a different trend in Nigeria.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned just around sort of young people in the digital space, because I don't think a lot of us had really connected those dots, right? The dots between earning as an influencer or earning as, somebody whose main source of income comes online. What does that really mean for your level of engagement and ability to engage with government in the traditional form? So I think it's actually very interesting. Michael Moore, who had written quite a bit on activism, with Bowling for Columbine, he has this interesting notion that student debt and all these systems of things that you get from your government, in some ways they can sometimes silence you, because as long as the government is placating you with some particular input, then you will be quiet and you will play nice. But I think for a lot of Nigerian youth, which is what you're alluding to, they were making money on their own. It's not really that they were reliant on government or getting any types of government subsidies. And then the little that you're making, on your own, you feel like somebody, is snatching their hand into it because there's such a lack of good governance. So I think that's an important, building block to think about. And talking about building blocks, I think we have Rafiu back from Building Blocks, and we would just really love to get from you the same question that I'd asked to Tanwa, which is really, what do you think is the birthplace of this particular movement. What is NSAS, and not just in the surface level, but in terms of what it really means for young people, and why now, why they're pushing this hard?
All right, thank you so much. I want to start by saying that what we are seeing in Nigeria now is actually a reaction to the long-term socioeconomic deprivation and marginalization, and if you like, the exclusion that young people in Nigeria have faced over the years. The NSAS movement is a result of, several brutalities that young people have suffered in the hands of the SAS units of the Nigerian police. Many of us have been victimized. Many of us have been harassed, for our dressings, for our jobs, and all kinds of things like that. And we felt that it was not going to, be good to continue in that dimension. You remember the case of Kolade Johnson, who was killed. You remember the case of Precious, who was killed, and recently that of Jimo Isiaka. Unfortunately, we just have to rally around the police brutality and violations of human rights. If you look at, statistics coming from the National Bureau of Statistics, the unemployment rate is crazy. About 30% of Nigeria's, population, they are unemployed. The poverty level in Nigeria is unexplainable. Even those of us who are trying to make something out of our lives, there are no infrastructures to support our aspirations. Yeah. And all these things, in totality means that an average Nigerian is being endangered. We're not respected at home, we're not respected abroad. And that was why we felt that it was time to call our leaders to order, so that we don't just live for the sake of, living safe. We know how our peers are living, in other climes. Yeah. But of course, it appears that our leaders are taking us for a ride. And we felt that it was high time we let them know that the people truly should be the driving force behind any democratic government. And that's exactly what you are seeing. The NSAS is just a starting point. And I hope that we can sustain the momentum, consolidate on the gains, to especially direct, the trajectory of governance in this country.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question around sort of the origins of NSAS. As Tanwa mentioned, we know that this did not begin in 2020. We know that 2020 is in some ways a culmination of what has been going on. But we know that Nigerians came out in 2017, young Nigerians, for the same issue, right? And I was there on the ground, so we saw people protest. And then we went ahead and we voted around and against those lines. So my question to you is, what's different now? Are we going to come out and do the protest, and then shortly after that, in the next election, not make this a central issue? Or are we seeing something different in this particular round of protests? I want to understand whether we're going to have a different outcome, because this is not the first time that we've protested on this issue. Of course, the scale is grander, but the question then begs, what is different now, and what will be different?
All right, thank you so much. I think that what we're experiencing right now can best be described as a youth quake. This protest marks a turning point for Nigerian youth. Over the years, we've had cause to protest and go back to relax. But I think that with the momentum that we're building at the moment, with the consciousness that we have seen so far, I think that it's not going to be the same going forward in 2023. And I think that a lot of us have that. This is not just a thing. It's an opportunity for us to mobilize behind our own aspirations. It's an opportunity for us to mobilize behind our own ideas, behind our own interests. Because the reality is that either you like it or not, this protest cannot be indefinite. It's going to end someday. But one of the ways by which we can consolidate on the gains is to mobilize ourselves, someone who has our interest, genuine interest at heart. So for me, I don't think it's going to be normal again. It's not. Even our political leaders are aware. They are aware of that, and that's why many of them are shivering all around. So it's not going to be the same.
Yeah. So that's the hope, that it's not going to be the same. I don't know, Tanwa, if you want to just come in here and maybe talk a little bit about the security challenge that we're now facing. We saw an interesting thread on Twitter that had essentially shown all of the number of cases of violence and real videos, right? Put together by a BBC journalist. That has shown us videos across the country, from Abuja and beyond, really, showing young people being shot at, showing hooligans and disruptors violating the property of other people. So I think when we're looking at this, the first thing that we are thinking about is security. How do we make sure, and can we make sure at this point, that this protest does not devolve into a violent protest and therefore diminish the value of what young Nigerians have put together so effectively and powerfully?
Yeah, I think it's just really unfortunate. You know, Rafiu talked about the unemployment rate being at 30%. And if we know anything also about the educational system, the institution of education in Nigeria, we also know it's just equally poor. You just don't even have enough schools to put all your youth and young people through. And but just with the twist now that we have with the current protests, it's almost clear to see why it is that some of these repressions remain in place. The need to just have like an army of young unemployed people who can become your little personal army to do your bidding in times of violence or or conflict. And then also that same thing goes with education. We saw a protest that started off extremely organized, young people, educated people, having their different tools, methods, mechanisms, strategies, and just even doing more for the protests than we've seen their governments or even local governments and in some cases some state governments ever put together in terms of welfare for their people. So we saw that, and all of this comes from an exposed and enlightened and educated population. Unfortunately, now we're seeing the other half. We're seeing that 30% that's unemployed and just don't know anything. We're seeing the other half, those people who are uneducated and just do the bidding for their stomachs for today, come in and totally disrupt the protests. Now we've been doing some scenario analysis, just some forecasts as part of what we try to do, so that we can advise people to plan accordingly. And look at the different scenarios. From the beginning, we thought about it and said, look, already the military and the government knows that you should not bring the military per se and law enforcement to shoot at protesters. They know that would be bad press. They know it will not help their cause. It would probably exacerbate the protests even more. Even though we saw some of that, but we also heard quickly how some the leadership in the police immediately tried to clamp down on those erring officers who shot at protesters. And same with the military. So they understand that. I mean, we've been seeing protests sweeping the entire globe over the last year or so, from Hong Kong to the US and different parts of Africa. And then now it's here at our doorsteps. First of all, did they really not see this coming? Because what that means is that if you know that protesting and civil unrest is a major threat, what you do is you arm yourselves with the right equipment, meaning that you do not take live arms and firearms to quell a protest. You have proper equipment for that. And also, you do not just use that equipment unless you see it turning extremely violent. Even with that, policemen who are trained on this are trained to use restraint when responding to these things. So unfortunately, right now, looking at different scenarios, trying to figure out what is next, there are a couple of things that we were thinking about. Number one is that the government just allows the protest to continue on, and it continues on peacefully. But then, which was what they were initially doing until we saw thugs being mobilized to just cause chaos. All right. Now, some people think that scenario number two was that this is all planned and strategic as well, and that the hope or the plan behind this is to make it seem extremely violent. And at that point, you then have to call a curfew, which is what we've now seen happen in Benin and in Lagos. And or you then have to mobilize your military or your law enforcement to quell the protests and also to enforce curfews. So you squashed it. All right. So that's the second scenario. But then we know that even with that second scenario, you're probably still going to see this same young, resourceful, educated people who are extremely wired in the 21st century probably take the protest online and continue on from that point. So that's number two. And then also scenario number three, then we're probably looking at a situation whereby, they just send in the military regardless. Okay, we just squash everything, and just clamp down on anyone who we know has been involved. And it could be very, very bad for the country in terms of the international community. We could start looking at sanctions. You could start looking at international businesses moving out of a country that is already struggling economically. So either way, we're looking at this. What remains and what we know needs to happen at this point is that, first of all, we know that the young people had a 5 for 5 points, right? 5 things that they're demanding for. And so they need to be able to see that the government is proactively working towards fulfilling these 5 requests that they had, and also taking police reform and just even the security sector reform a bit more seriously. That's what they need to see. And for those who don't know, the 5 points were, number 1 was to release all arrested protesters. There have been some action on that so far. Number 2 was justice and compensation for the families of victims, those people that, you know, have died from the hands of SARS and even just police brutality in general. They need to be compensated. In order to do that, you do need to conduct an investigation. So that was even the number 3 request, independent body to oversee the prosecution of the officers. So conduct an investigation, bring those officers to book, charge them for taking lives needlessly. And if they're going to do that, do it openly so that everybody sees that there's justice and there's equality that's going on. Number 4 is psychological evaluation of those disbanded officers before redeployment. So we know that not all SARS people are bad, for example. But if that's the case, don't just redeploy the policemen. We know the problem is institutional. So what kind of institutional changes are you going to make? And the 5th one was an increase in police salaries. So these were the requests that they had laid out. And what I think the young people needed to see is swift action. Is the government taking these things seriously? Is the government continuing dialogue with them? The introduction now of just thugs to quell the protests and to force people back in their homes, it's probably just going to switch it online. And we've seen already with cyber attacks, Anonymous involved themselves with this protest, and we already saw denial of service attacks to a lot of government websites that were shut down. I know some information of policemen were released publicly online, and just, you know, so we may just see something that completely shifts to cyber, and we may just even start experiencing some form of cyber warfare, almost, so to speak, cyber protests here in Nigeria. So, you know, the scenarios, the outcomes, the forecast, either way, it boils down to one thing: the government needs to show a strong stance that it is for the young people, and it's going to do everything within its power to take care of the young people in this country.
Fantastic analysis. Thank you so much, Tanwa. And I think, you know, you made a couple of really strong points around the different scenarios, right? And where we end up. I mean, our ability to avoid scenario 3 is really in the hands of this government, right? It's about government response, and because they're essentially the ones who have the power. I think a lot of protesters, they could stay at home in this time, but I don't know that that's going to change things in terms of what the hoodlums are doing. In fact, I saw earlier this morning a post, I think it was on EIE, on Enough is Enough, around the fact that protesters had to pay for their security when they go to protest, and at the same time, you know, somebody else was funding the hoodlums to advance and cause chaos. And the fact that is the context that we're working in means that it really is up to government to respond in the appropriate manner. I guess my immediate question to you would be, and I would also love to hear your take on this, Rafiu, is what can we as citizens do? I know you've mentioned a little bit about, you know, cyber protests and looking into that, and what does that look like? That sounds really interesting. But I think as citizens, and in fact as an international community as well, what are the different things that we can do to support this protest and to ensure that it doesn't devolve into what we're seeing today? Because I think there is, to some extent, a feeling of helplessness from those who have really sacrificed and put a lot of work into this movement, only to find that it is being overrun by people with different intentions. Rafiu, you can start, and you can also chime in, Tanwa.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that the first thing we need to do is to encourage active participation of all categories of people in this country. Like you know, the protest was started by young people, but of course we need other categories of people to also support the women, the elderly, to also come and support some of these agitations. Internationally, I think that there are several international conventions and treaties that Nigeria is a signatory to, and I think that the international community, the UN, the AU, the ECOWAS, they have that mandate and responsibility to hold Nigeria accountable to some of these conventions and treaties. The right to protest is guaranteed by the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The right to protest is guaranteed by Nigeria's 1999 federal 1999 Constitution as amended, and I think that any attempt to deny people this right, Nigeria should be held responsible. I also think that the international community should put some kind of pressure on our government to listen to the yearnings and the demands of young people. These are legitimate demands. These are valid demands. I don't know what it takes. I mean, to see to the realization of some of these things. What does it take to release all those who have been detained illegally? I've been to so many, 1 or 2 prisons in Nigeria, and I know the condition and states of people who are there. A prison that was originally built for 300 people now has over 1,005 people. Majority of them illegally detained without giving fair trial. What does it take to release some of these people, even those in our prisons, in our police stations rather? What does it take? What does it take to set up, a panel of inquiry to trial all police officers who have been found, wanting? What does it does not take anything, but it seems that our government feels that, it's something that's going to disappear with time. So I think that the international community needs to put more pressure on Nigeria to ensure that Nigeria, listen to the yearnings and demands of on young people. Then internally, I think that we need to continue to mobilize. We need to continue to organize ourselves and act responsibly so that hoodlums do not just come and hijack this protest from us.
That's really good advice, well taken from somebody who has done a lot of the mobilizing on the ground himself. So I think we hear you, and you're echoing similar sentiments to what a lot of young leaders have been saying about making sure we keep these protests peaceful, and also making sure that we engage and agitate the international community to take this more seriously. We've seen Wall Street Journal do a piece on this. We've seen CNN cover the story, BBC, a number of independent, reporters like Aisha Sise doing really full-on sessions on NSARS and bringing it to the spotlight. So indeed, there has been, some movement from the international community, and the question is, how do we continue to build this momentum? I think, Tanwa, at first, something that you had mentioned around sort of this cyber warfare that is really quite new and intriguing for so many people. We were looking at a piece earlier today on Nairametrics about the Hong Kong similar sort of scenario in Hong Kong, and our own NSARS protest, and how that those two protests almost mirror one another. And some of the argument that was made there is that the distinction that we have is we don't have as much money being poured into our organizing process as they did in Hong Kong, where significant shifts were able to they were able to make significant shifts and strides because there was such a deep level of organization and financial support to protesters, as well as to what comes after the protest. So I guess my question to you then, Tanwa, would be, when we think about what this cyber warfare would look like, what are the types of resources we need to mobilize in order to either to make cyber protest, and also in order to maybe mitigate some of the impacts of what could be Nigeria's first ever Nigerian cyber warfare? What would that look like, and what could that impact be, and how do we mitigate and stand against some of the negative fallout from something like that?
So I think if you look at it, the protests are all about putting pressure on the decision makers to make certain decisions in the favor of the young people who are speaking out. And so if anything, if they moved it to the cyberspace, what we're looking at is them putting pressure. And how would they do that? Number one, shutting down government websites, right? You're going to make people uncomfortable. People will be jittery. There will be some sleepless nights within those circles. Second thing is also going for the banks, which we've already seen normally, just even on a day-to-day basis, Nigerian banks are often extremely attacked. And I know that the cyber commands, the various cyber commands right now, the Army and the NSA, everybody is just up, awake, just trying to tackle things, including even the banks and their different cyber offices are just running amok right now. So you target them, okay? And I know it would hit a whole different level by the time money start coming out, by the time we start hitting the wallets of people, or the wallet of the government. Already, we saw even with Lagos State shutting down something like the toll gate already, we know would have impacted the revenue that they're bringing in to the country as a whole. So they're going to try to go for the money, okay, via cyberspace, going for the banks, going for the economy, going for government institutions and government personnel. We probably may start seeing a lot of leaks, all right, emails being leaked, phone conversations being leaked online, personal information being leaked online as well. And all these things, which we already even saw. I think there was something that I saw that went around, and it shared phone numbers of high-level government officials and said, here you go, here's a number, including the phone number of the vice president. I know I tried one of the other numbers there for a minister, and it actually worked. It was his actual number that I had saved on the phone. So we're going to start seeing things like that. And why are they doing all of this? To put that pressure on, to put pressure on them, to put pressure on the National Assembly, to put pressure on the lawmakers, to say, you know what, you think you can send thugs out there and you think that's going to stop us? Well, it's not. Anyway, well, that's things from the security perspective. Now, let's look at things from the conflict resolution perspective. Now, when you're talking about conflict resolution, which at the end of the day, that is where we want to get to. We don't want this to get to a warfare state. We don't want this to get to a military state. Because one thing that we've seen, research has shown that anytime there's a protest, the moment you introduce the military to it, the fatalities increase over 100%. So we definitely just don't want that to happen. Now, then how do we just handle the rest of this protest peacefully? What that is going to require is dialogue. And I know it's the one thing that everyone's been shying away from. It's the one thing that they've prided themselves, which is the young people have prided themselves about just this being an organic protest. There are no leaders, and they're happy about that because that means there's no person you can just go and pick up and arrest. However, though, there is need for dialogue. So again, this is where the cyberspace can come in. The ability to create town hall sessions, to bring as many young people together, to field questions from them, to field an avenue for their grievances to be shared, and for that direct conversation to go on between themselves and the decision makers. I think that's probably also something that we may see if this then ends up moving to a cyberspace protest. That need for dialogue, the need for them to see that yes, these policemen are actually being arrested, that there's sweeping overhauls that are taking place. Police reform, and for those people who don't know, has to do with the fact that if you see the current conditions of the Nigerian police force, you will understand why sometimes they act barbaric in the way that they do. It is extremely poor, it is dismal. You and I will not send our children or advise them to go into such a field. And so when we're asking for police reforms, or even army reforms, we've seen several videos of army personnel complaining also about their welfare, about the equipment that they don't have, training that they lack, etc. So again, these are just dialogue that, and then unfortunately, each time they come out, each time you have a whistleblower that comes out, they get persecuted by their leadership for doing that. But we do not want that to happen. We want genuine conversation to take place, but even more so, they want to see action. So I think with regards to resolving this conflict, dialogue needs to take place. If we take it on an electronic e-town hall method, even that will be fine. Let there be an avenue. Let the young people feel that their voices are genuinely being heard and that changes are actually taking place and happening. So I think that may be the good thing that will come out of the physical protest being taken away, because there was no person to speak to say, okay, you know what, give us 6 months. Then if we don't, accomplish things in 6 months' time, come back. But to, even now with quelling the protests and sending people home, it's really going to impact the economy already, a struggling economy as it is. So, it's definitely going to be, the next couple of months are going to be very, very interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I mean, the tactics around making sure that we don't identify a leader that you can pick up, I mean, these go as far back as your apartheid struggles, where sometimes you wouldn't even know who the key leaders were, or the key leaders wouldn't even show up for the protest in order to avoid being victimized and targeted. And I think that there's been a consensus across NSAS that you talk to all of us, you engage all of us, you engage all young Nigerians, and we're not necessarily allowing you to pinpoint one individual. Tell me, Rafiu, from a really pragmatic point of view, do you think that there needs to be a moment across young Nigerians where we actually sit down and have some type of in-house meeting and start to, at some level, identify the people who are actually going to take this agenda forward? Because Tanwa has just spoken about dialogue. Can you have a dialogue with millions of people at a time? I think not, you know. And what kinds of dialogue should it be? And I think the structuring of that, how do you see that taking place, and how do you see that taking place in a way that doesn't end up getting us to the same types of challenges of power grabbing and power struggle and misrepresentation and exclusion that we see in the government today?
Well, thank you so much. I want to start by agreeing with what Tanwa said. I think that dialogue is the way to go. And I also heard her talking about some kind of electronic or virtual town hall meeting. I think that is something that we need to start considering, because the reality is that we must also start discussing our exit strategy from this protest. And if we are to consolidate on all the gains that we have made so far, it's important for us to establish or inaugurate some kind of, maybe not leadership, but at least representatives, those who can represent the youth adequately going forward. I think that the initial fears around setting up leadership structure or representative structure was to avoid unnecessary sellouts, or was to avoid unnecessary arrest by the government because of, the antecedents of government over the years. But I think that what is happening right now, the NSAS movement is an idea. And you just cannot kill an idea whose time has come. If you try to pick any of our leaders, you are going to escalate. They're going to escalate the situation. So for me, I think that at this point, we need, at least we can not just the demands around the NSAS movement. I think that we need to take our demands forward. We need to start demanding for better governance. We need to start demanding for young people's inclusion. Meaningful inclusion in decision-making processes. President Muhammadu Buhari came up with his list of ministers some months ago, and no young person was included. No young person was appointed. It's a slap on our face. And these are things that I think that we need to start putting forward. So to answer your question, I think that we can take advantage of the social media. We can take advantage of internet. We have seen that one of the things that has helped so far in amplifying our causes and our agitation to this NSAS movement is the internet. And I think that we'll continue to leverage on it to bring ourselves together. Maybe because of the population, it might be difficult to bring everybody together on Zoom, for example. But I know that we can have people who can represent their various constituencies. There are several youth groups in Nigeria. There are several, youth CSOs and all that. Those who have, who represent the youth constituency. We can bring all this together. In my own proposal, which I shared some days ago, was that we can elect or select 12 representatives from the 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. Those who we know that over the years they have stood their grounds for us. They can represent us well, and they will not sell out. I think that we really need that. We really need that at the moment. If not having a clear-cut leadership for this movement is a big disadvantage, and we need to realize that on time and quickly inaugurate our representatives.
Agreed. I think that leadership exercise, that selection process, there are elements of it that have already started. So I know, for example, the sort of Human Rights Commission that Fowles was talking about recently on his Instagram, where he had been saying that we should have representatives, volunteer or nominate, the right folks who will speak up on our behalf, and let people know that Nigerian youth are serious. But also have an agenda that is presented to them, and that they present then on our behalf in a way that they don't derail from that. I think that work is underway, and the ways in which young people can get involved in those movements are available on social media to some extent. But we need that level of encouragement that says we've now moved into a new phase of the protest that requires not just your showing up for the protests and for the walks, but it requires a systematic transformation. It requires your voting, it requires your civic participation and your mobilization within your communities. So it's a very clear point, and I hope that young people all over are hearing you loud and clear. You know, as I think about this entire conversation, you know, I wonder if there's something that we can laugh about. You know, we've had a very great a conversation about some serious things that are happening in our country. Some that are causing a significant amount of strain and a significant amount of fear amongst people who are in the heart of these insecurities. And for a lot of young people, this is also a tough moment. We still have not dealt with the coronavirus. I know everybody has sort of put that one on the side, but the reality of the case count is that it is rising. And we, you know, we have that concern as well. Economically, you know, as you mentioned, you talked about unemployment at 37 or 30% When we talk about youth contribution to that unemployment, it's something closer to 60–70%. And so there seems to be a lot of bleak news. My question to both of you really is, what is the hope? What is the hope for young Nigerians today? What is the hope even for the older Nigerians who are looking at the youth with envy and with a bit of pride, you know, at this movement? What can we all be hopeful for?
Yeah, no, I think the hope here is just knowing that we have a generation that's coming up that is not going to just sit back and take absolute nonsense anymore. I think just knowing, because they did not grow up in that military era, right? Those who grew up in the military era were afraid to make moves, because you knew that if you made a move, you may not see the daylight tomorrow. We have a fearless generation coming up right now. And they're the ones who are saying, you know what, forget this, we are done with all the nonsense governance. And if we have to take matters into our own hands, we shall do it in any means, by any means necessary. And so I think that really right there is the hope, is you don't have a generation that's going to sit down and fold their arms. And that is exactly what we need in Nigeria, because Nigeria is just that society where you call for a protest, you call for elections, you call for these things, and you have people that just sit back and fold their arms and say they're not interested. Hopefully, and what I'm hoping for them is that they take the same energy into 2023. Is that from now, this point, you're able to actually come together using one of the perhaps existing political parties or something, and then using the same energy to rally up your constituents, rally up the votes, and saying, you know what, you ain't seen nothing yet. We are going to show you that if we wanted to really take the presidency and win elections, we absolutely can. And so I'm hoping that this same energy is taken into 2023. I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thanks so much, Tanwa. And I share the same hope. I share the same hope. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's continue praying and hoping for the best. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add as well, Rafiu. Tell us, you know, what are you hopeful for? What do you think we should still have reason to smile about concerning, you know, this issue?
Well, I think that even what is happening at the moment in Nigeria is something that we all should celebrate, that young people can rise up in unison without, clear-cut leadership, across the length and breadth of this country to demand what is due to them is something that we need to celebrate. The realest asset of this country. Unfortunately, the government is not paying attention to it, and we have brought that to bear. We have shown the world that truly young people are the assets, the greatest asset of this country. And if you look at the trajectory, unfortunately, not many of us are looking at how this movement started. It's demanding for a reduction, at least, institutions. Well, maybe not very concretely now, but at least we started building the momentum. From the not too young to run, now you have the NSAS movement. I tell you, before the end of next year, 2021, you're going to have another big movement in Nigeria that's going to shape the history and future of this country. So with technology, with social media, with our population, well, the sky is the beginning point for Nigeria.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rafiu, and thank you so much, Tanwa. So, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you've heard it here. I think in summary, it's been a fantastic conversation. We've heard about the potential scenarios that await us as a nation in terms of security. And we've heard how we want to avoid the most violent of the scenarios. We've heard about the demands of young people, and we've heard how really simple and rudimentary and basic some of these demands really are when we think about the current, police system, and when we think about the economic situation that we're in. We've heard about the agitation of young people and their ability to mobilize in spite of, and the ways in which we can avoid some of the distraction and the detraction that has happened to these protests that has been brought about by people who do not have the country's heart in mind, or they do not have the country's best interests in mind. And we've also heard about the ways in which this protest is shifting and could shift into a cyber protest and cyber warfare, and how in fact it has already begun and is already underway. We've also had some great insights on what we as young people can do and what the international community can do to mobilize and support this movement of young people, and how we can ensure that we make sure that we can ensure that peace and peaceful protest is the language that we use, and ways in which we can also ensure that we have correct representation to move things forward. And finally, and I think most importantly, we have heard that there is so much to hope for, that we can be hopeful, and we should really celebrate what young Nigerians have been able to do in this time, in this era, in spite of the degree of pressure. And we should be excited, in fact, for the prediction that was first made here by Rafiu, that by 2021, we'll be seeing another one, such movement, except at that point, we would have received our 5 for 5. And hopefully we'll be looking for another 10 for 10 or something else. But overall, we will be demanding more as young people from our government, which is an exciting time. Thank you both so much for these insights. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And thanks once again to the foundation and to everybody who has participated. This is recorded, so we will be resharing it for your purposes. And if you have any additional questions, definitely follow the foundation, follow us on Instagram, and continue to support the work of ending SARS and starting something of a better Nigeria at the same time. Thank you all.